Elara Voss arrived in Monaco with nothing but a suitcase and a past no one could trace, and 14 months later Lucien Moreau was dead, his fortune exposed, and a sealed vault whispering truths that were never meant to survive him. When Elara Voss first arrived in Monaco, no one noticed her. She stepped into the city quietly, carrying a single suitcase and a carefully prepared identity. She was 22 years old, with no visible connections and no known history that mattered to the elite world surrounding the harbor. Monaco was full of beautiful strangers, and she blended in easily, choosing anonymity over attention. She rented a modest apartment far from the cliffs and casinos, a place where the walls were thin and the neighbors uninterested. What set Elara apart was patience. She did not rush into the glittering social circles that surrounded wealth and power. Instead, she observed. She learned routines, schedules, and patterns. She memorized which hotels hosted private charity events and which galleries attracted discreet collectors. She studied the difference between new money and old money, and she understood that the latter spoke less and watched more. Lucien Moreau was already a legend long before Elara entered his world. His name rarely appeared in interviews, yet his influence shaped ports, shipping lanes, and private investments across Europe. He lived surrounded by staff, but emotionally isolated. His inner circle had not changed in decades, and trust was something he gave sparingly. When Elara appeared at a small cultural fundraiser he attended every year, it seemed like coincidence. When she appeared again weeks later, it still raised no alarms. Their connection grew slowly, almost invisibly. Elara never pushed herself forward. She let others introduce her, allowed curiosity to work in her favor, and spoke only when necessary. Those who observed them noticed how Lucien began adjusting his schedule to include her presence. He traveled less. He canceled long-standing meetings. He seemed calmer, then strangely dependent. Within months, Elara moved into his estate overlooking the sea. The shift was dramatic, but few questioned it openly. Youth paired with wealth was nothing new in Monaco. The speed of the relationship was explained away as loneliness meeting opportunity. When the marriage was announced, it shocked even those accustomed to excess. The ceremony was private, attended by almost no one. No childhood friends of the bride were present. No family members were named. After the wedding, Lucien's world began to shrink. Advisors who had served him for decades were dismissed quietly. Financial decisions were rerouted through Elara's approval. Staff noticed changes in Lucien's habits. He slept more, ate less, and complained of fatigue that doctors struggled to explain. His health reports showed decline, but nothing specific enough to alarm authorities. Elara, meanwhile, remained composed. She avoided the spotlight and declined public appearances. She dressed elegantly but without extravagance. To outsiders, she appeared devoted and calm, a young wife caring for an aging husband. To those inside the estate, there was a growing unease that no one could explain. 14 months after the wedding, Lucien Moreau was found dead in his private residence. The official cause was natural failure. There were no signs of violence, no forced entry, and no immediate reason to suspect foul play. Monaco accepted the conclusion without protest. Elara became a widow almost as quietly as she had become a wife. Lucien Moreau had built his life around control. Every contract he signed was duplicated, every asset recorded, and every movement logged through layers of security. His estate above the coast was designed to protect not only wealth, but information. Beneath the marble floors and art-lined halls sat a vault that few people had ever seen, and even fewer had entered. It was known among his lawyers as the final authority, the place where nothing was left to chance. In the weeks following his death, the atmosphere around the estate changed. Staff moved carefully, unsure of their future. Legal teams arrived quietly, bringing devices and sealed cases. Elara remained present but distant, observing without interference. She allowed the process to unfold as though she had nothing to hide. Lucien's will was read privately. The distribution was unexpected, but not illegal. Elara inherited the majority of his fortune, including properties, accounts, and controlling interests in several companies. Charities received modest endowments. Blood relatives, already distant, were nearly excluded. Some advisors expressed concern, but Lucien's signature was unquestionable. His mind, on paper, had been clear. When the vault was finally opened, expectations were simple. Auditors wanted to confirm records, secure valuables, and close Lucien's affairs cleanly. The first rooms matched the ledgers perfectly. Art pieces were logged. Jewelry was intact. Digital drives were encrypted but accounted for. The system appeared flawless. Then inconsistencies emerged. A shelf marked for rare gemstones was partially empty. Gold reserves listed in Lucien's handwriting were short by several units. Bearer bonds, the kind designed to leave no trace, were missing entirely. There was no damage to the vault, no broken seals. Access logs showed authorized entry only. The codes had not been forced or altered. Security records revealed that Elara had been present during multiple vault visits while Lucien was still alive. Each visit was approved personally by him. That detail complicated everything. If items had been removed, it had happened with consent or at least under his watch. At the back of the vault, behind a panel disguised as structural support, investigators discovered a compartment that was not listed in any official record. It required biometric confirmation that no longer existed. Only after legal intervention was it opened. Inside were no valuables. Instead, there were folders labeled by dates, not assets. Encrypted drives sat beside handwritten notes. Surveillance photos, travel records, and financial diagrams filled the space. It was a second vault within the first, designed to be overlooked by anyone searching only for wealth. The contents raised immediate concern. They did not describe Lucien's business rivals or hidden investments. They documented a person. Every page pointed toward Elara, mapping her movements before Monaco, before the marriage, before the name she used now. What unsettled investigators most was the timeline. The files stopped months before Lucien's death, as if he had chosen to stop digging. There was no conclusion, no accusation, no warning letter left behind. Just silence. As the vault door closed again, it became clear that Lucien Moreau had not been as unprepared as everyone believed. Whatever had been happening inside his home had been recorded, hidden, and protected. And the vault had only begun to tell its story. The material inside the hidden compartment rewrote everything investigators thought they knew about Elara Voss. The identity she had presented in Monaco began only a few years earlier, clean and carefully constructed. Before that, there were gaps filled with deliberate erasures. The documents showed that Lucien had hired a private intelligence firm known for tracing people who did not want to be found. What they uncovered was a trail that crossed borders and names with disturbing consistency. Elara had not been born Elara. Her original identity traced back to a small Eastern European city where records were incomplete and easily altered. By the time she was 18, she had already left that country using falsified papers. From there, she moved through luxury resorts, private clubs, and elite circles with calculated precision. Each move placed her near men of significant wealth, usually older, usually isolated. The intelligence reports listed 3 deaths before Lucien. Each man had suffered rapid health decline, each ruled natural, and each had altered financial arrangements shortly before dying. In every case, Elara was present in the final months, introduced as a companion, assistant, or future spouse. No investigation connected the cases at the time because they occurred in different countries under different identities. Financial records filled in the pattern. Offshore accounts were opened weeks before each death, often under corporate structures that dissolved soon after. Small but meaningful sums were transferred, never enough to trigger alarms, but enough to fund the next disappearance. Elara never stayed to enjoy the aftermath. She vanished quickly, resurfacing elsewhere with a new name and a refined story. What made Lucien's case different was his awareness. According to the final intelligence summary, he became suspicious after discovering inconsistencies in Elara's background that could not be verified. Instead of confronting her, he allowed the investigation to continue in secret. Surveillance logs showed him monitoring his own household, tracking his own routines, and documenting subtle changes in his health. Medical files stored with the report added another layer. They showed Lucien had been prescribed a combination of medications that, when altered slightly, could cause slow organ failure without immediate symptoms. Notes in his handwriting indicated he suspected manipulation. Rather than correcting the dosage, he adjusted it himself, carefully observing the effects. The most unsettling part of the file was Lucien's decision to stop the investigation. The intelligence firm's final invoice was marked cancelled by Lucien personally. There was no explanation given, no request for arrest, no attempt to expose Elara publicly. Instead, Lucien reorganized his estate. He revised his will, granted Elara broader access, and ensured she was present during sensitive financial activities. It appeared reckless on the surface, but hidden notes suggested intention. Lucien had concluded that Elara would not stop. If he survived, she would disappear and find another target. If he confronted her, she would vanish before evidence could surface. His solution was to let the pattern complete itself. By allowing his own death to unfold under controlled conditions, Lucien believed he could trap her using documentation, timing, and greed. The vault became his confession and his weapon. Whether it was sacrifice or miscalculation remained unclear. But the evidence suggested that Lucien Moreau did not die unaware. He died watching the end he had already predicted. 10 days after Lucien Moreau was buried, the estate above the Monaco coast fell silent in a different way. The formal mourning period ended, and the legal machinery surrounding his death moved faster. Financial institutions began verifying transfers. International firms requested confirmations. It was during this narrow window that Elara prepared to leave. She did not announce her departure. There were no public statements or visible goodbyes. Travel records later showed that a private flight had been scheduled under a corporate name connected to Lucien's shipping business. The timing suggested routine business, not escape. At the airport, her passport passed initial checks, but a secondary system flagged inconsistencies. The document matched her name but failed deeper biometric confirmation. That delay proved critical. While Elara was held briefly for identity verification, investigators accelerated their review of the vault's contents. The missing assets were now treated as evidence, not inheritance. Financial analysts traced transactions that activated only after Lucien's death, yet had been structured months earlier. Shell companies appeared in jurisdictions known for secrecy. Each trail pointed back to variations of Elara's former identities. The pattern was too precise to dismiss. The transfers were timed to trigger when legal control shifted fully to Elara. It showed planning, not grief. Authorities began coordinating quietly with international partners, reopening old case files tied to unexplained deaths. Inside Lucien's estate, one final item had not yet been examined. A leather-bound ledger, handwritten and personal, unlike the formal documents elsewhere. It was found hidden inside a wall compartment of his study, sealed behind artwork that had not been moved in years. The ledger contained Lucien's private observations. He wrote about noticing his strength fading in unnatural ways. He described changes in taste, prolonged fatigue, and organ stress that did not align with his age or medical history. Over time, his writing became less speculative and more precise. He named compounds, dosages, and delivery methods that could be disguised as supplements or prescribed medication. Lucien documented his realization that confronting Elara would end only one way. She would disappear, leaving suspicion but no proof. He believed law enforcement would dismiss his claims without a body or a pattern. Instead, he decided to create both. He wrote about altering his will deliberately, ensuring Elara would inherit enough wealth to act. He understood that greed would force her to move assets quickly, exposing networks she had kept hidden for years. He described the vault's secondary compartment as a trap that could only be opened after his death, timed to the moment investigators would search for money and find truth instead. By the time Elara was released from airport custody, informal warrants were already being drafted. Her movements were monitored, but she was no longer where authorities expected her to be. Security footage showed her leaving a secondary exit hours earlier, using a different appearance and travel documents. By the time international notices were issued, Elara had vanished. Her accounts were frozen, but not before significant sums disappeared beyond recovery. Authorities now believed Lucien had been correct. The inheritance had forced her to reveal more than any accusation ever could. Lucien Moreau was dead, but the case he designed was finally alive. 10 days after Lucien Moreau was buried, the quiet around his estate felt deliberate rather than respectful. The formal mourning period ended, and the focus shifted from sympathy to procedure. Lawyers, accountants, and auditors moved through the house with measured urgency, documenting every detail. Elara remained present but distant, observing without interruption. To those watching closely, her calm seemed less like grief and more like calculation. Behind the scenes, financial institutions began verifying transfers tied to Lucien's will. Several large movements of capital were initiated almost immediately after his death. At first glance, everything appeared legal. The structures had been prepared in advance, the signatures were valid, and the timing followed inheritance law. But analysts noticed something unusual. The accounts receiving the funds were newly activated, yet the corporate frameworks behind them had existed for months, dormant and waiting. At the same time, Elara made preparations of her own. Travel records later revealed that a private flight had been scheduled using a company connected to Lucien's shipping empire. The departure was quiet, framed as routine business. There was no public farewell and no notice to the estate staff. She packed lightly, leaving behind personal items that suggested she did not intend to return. At the airport, her passport cleared initial inspection, but a deeper verification system flagged irregularities. The name was correct, but biometric data did not fully align. She was delayed for further checks, unaware that this brief pause would shift the entire investigation. While Elara waited, authorities intensified their review of the vault. The missing assets were no longer treated as clerical errors. Financial experts mapped the transaction paths and uncovered links to identities that did not officially exist. Each trail connected to variations of Elara's past names, some long buried, some partially exposed. The pattern matched cases that had once seemed unrelated. During a final sweep of Lucien's private study, investigators found a leather-bound ledger hidden behind a mounted painting. Unlike the formal records, this book was personal. Lucien had written in it regularly during the last year of his life. The entries detailed his declining health and his growing certainty that it was not natural. He documented substances that could be disguised as medication, explaining how small changes over time could cause fatal organ failure without raising immediate suspicion. Lucien also described his decision to remain silent. He believed that confronting Elara would only allow her to disappear again. Instead, he planned to let events unfold. He altered his will, expanded her access, and ensured she would inherit enough wealth to reveal her own network. He turned his death into leverage. By the time Elara was released from airport custody, internal alerts were already circulating. Authorities attempted to locate her, but she was no longer where records placed her. Security footage later showed her leaving through a secondary exit hours earlier, using a different appearance and alternate documents. When international notices were finally issued, Elara Voss was gone. Lucien Moreau had died as expected, but the trap he built had already closed. Elara Voss was never officially found. In the weeks after her disappearance, reports surfaced from multiple countries claiming sightings of a woman matching her description. None could be confirmed. Each lead dissolved under scrutiny, leaving behind only fragments of possibility. Authorities suspected she had used one of her remaining identities, prepared long before Monaco, to step into another life as easily as she had left the last. International investigators continued tracing the financial trails she exposed. Several offshore accounts were frozen, but a significant portion of Lucien Moreau's fortune had already vanished. The missing funds moved through layers of shell companies and jurisdictions designed to erase ownership. Some accounts went dormant, suggesting long-term planning rather than impulsive theft. Whoever controlled them understood patience. As the case expanded, connections emerged between Elara and individuals who specialized in document forgery, asset laundering, and quiet relocations. These networks were known to protect their clients at a cost. Authorities believed that once Elara crossed a certain threshold, She stopped being a lone figure and became a liability. Whether she was hidden or silenced remained unclear. Lucien Moreau's legacy shifted in the public eye. What had first appeared to be a cautionary tale about wealth and youth transformed into something more calculated. Investigators now believed he had accepted his fate long before his death. By allowing Elara to inherit his fortune, he forced her to act, exposing patterns that had gone unnoticed for years. His death became the final data point that connected everything. The vault beneath his estate was sealed permanently by court order. Its contents were classified and shared only among select international agencies. The hidden compartment, once meant to store truth, became evidence in an ongoing effort to track similar cases. Financial institutions quietly adjusted risk models based on the pattern Lucien had revealed. Officially, Lucien's death remained classified as natural. No criminal ruling was ever issued. Without a suspect in custody, prosecutors could not move forward. The case existed in fragments, spread across borders and buried in confidential reports. It became a reference rather than a headline. Elara's story ended without resolution. Some believed she survived and disappeared into anonymity, protected by wealth that could erase mistakes. Others believed she did not live long enough to enjoy her escape. In the world she moved through, loose ends were dangerous. The estate above Monaco was eventually sold. New owners renovated the house, unaware of the decisions once made within its walls. The vault remained untouched, sealed behind reinforced concrete, its presence unmarked. Lucien Moreau was remembered as a man who lost control too late. Others remembered him differently, as someone who understood that stopping a predator did not always mean survival. Sometimes it meant leaving a trail too clear to ignore. And somewhere, whether alive or not, Elara's greatest secret remained unchanged. She had never needed to win. She only needed time.